Sharing here. Welcome, everybody. So good to see you all. Really appreciate everyone being here tonight for this really, really special event. This is our third ESEPP workshop. And today we're titling it, We Are Still Here, Disrupting Settler Colonialism and Going Beyond Land Acknowledgments. And I'm really, really excited. I have the honor of co-presenting with Pamela Villasenor, who both of us have shared and done this a few times. And each time that we do this, it's a really, really great experience. I always learn a lot. And so I'm hoping that that will be the same for everybody here today. Just to get us started, if you feel comfortable with sharing a little bit about, who you are, if you're part of ESEPP, that's great, let us know. But if you want to let us know also, where you're at, where you're currently located, whose lands you're occupying, feel free to share that in the chat. And we'll go ahead and get started. Let me see here. Start sharing my PowerPoint. Oops. All right, can everybody see this okay?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, thank you. As I said, welcome everybody. My name is Jose Paez, my pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a teacher in the Department of Social Work here at CSUN, and also part of the Planning Coordinating Committee for ESEPP. And Pamela, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself now. That'd be a good time.
Hamanatam, Netwan Pamela Villasenor. I'm a citizen of Fernandeño, Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, where I have the honor of working with and for my own tribal community. In this role, I do a lot of macro-based work and systems change, but also rethinking what systems could be when they're grounded in Indigenous knowledges, which is not the same as systems change. I'm very happy to be here with all of you, and my pronouns are she, hers.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting. The first, just so you all know, just to kind of get us organized here, our very first ESEPP workshop focused on one of the pillars around white supremacy, and that was around anti-Blackness and labor and capitalism. The second one we focused on just about a month ago now had to do with Orientalism and this ongoing perpetuation of war. Just two outstanding, incredible presentations. And then today we're focused on this third pillar around settler colonialism, specifically around land and the dispossession of land and invisibility of Indigenous people. Before we get started, because obviously, as you can tell, that's a really difficult topic. It's very emotional. And sometimes it can bring up a lot of feelings, activate a lot of feelings. So we want to try to prepare ourselves as best we can for the kind of space that we're going to be cultivating here. And so let's just start by helping ourselves prepare to transition into this learning space. And we'll just start by doing some easy movements here. I know we all live very busy lives. So this can be an opportunity for us just to start listening to what our bodies need. And so maybe let's just start by putting our neck to side, or maybe if you feel like rolling your neck, just nice and easy, taking this moment to call attention to your shoulders and your neck, taking a couple deep breaths. And then let's do some shoulder rolls, just kind of enjoying this movement, noticing any sensations in your back, in your arms, shoulders. And then on the screen, you'll notice various different movements. So go ahead and pick one of those movements and let's just hold it for 20 seconds. Right. I feel good. All right. Enjoy that stretch. Enjoy that movement. Along those lines, let's also take the time just for a minute to bring ourselves fully to this space, really try to generate our presence. Again, I know we live very multitask lives, very busy lives. And so you may right now be entering into this space, having either composing an email at the same time as you're watching this or writing a text or whatever it is. But I ask you to give yourself some permission just to disconnect from all of that and put everything down, just put everything to the side. And let's just spend a minute doing some breathing here. And it's a really easy activity. There's no sound to it. And as the triangle opens up, you take a breath in and inhale. And then as the triangle closes, you exhale. And it'll just be a minute long. So as I said, give yourself some permission to step away from everything else and generate your presence. Enjoy. All right. Thanks everybody for taking a moment just to breathe. Yeah, hopefully you enjoy that. Hopefully that helps us transition into this space here that we are in today. Just as a reminder, if you're not muted, if you could just make sure to mute yourself throughout the presentation, just to check in on that if you haven't. Okay, from here, I'm going to turn this over to Pamela to give us a little bit of a welcome. So Pamela.
Great, thank you so much. I think today is a really important conversation when we're talking about what is settler colonization and how do we disrupt it and what does an alternative future look like. And while all of that is incredibly important, at the center is Indigenous peoples. So what needs to be centered are Indigenous peoples themselves. So this is a contemporary photo of some of my tribal members and their families just a few years ago at Los Angeles City Hall in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day, recognizing indigeneity is a global concept. There are millions upon millions of beautiful Indigenous peoples around the globe. So when we center Indigenous peoples, we have to make sure that we are not centering their trauma, that instead we are centering their own resilience, that they are the holders of Indigenous knowledges, which is this concept of communal knowledge that is held by Indigenous peoples that has been amassed through millennia and is important to where they are in their time and space. What makes it different than other knowledges, than maybe those that are even taught in universities, is that these Indigenous knowledges often are based on relationality. So if we're talking about the environment, it's the relationship that humans have to the environment. That these knowledges are not only for the elite, they are part of oral traditions, and there is a communal responsibility to teach it to the next generations. And most importantly, Indigenous knowledges are connected to the sacred, which means that there is this sense that Indigenous peoples have a very clear connection to their time and place, to the lands they're on, the waters that they drink, the air that they breathe. So what's important about Indigenous knowledge is that reminds us that Indigenous peoples have been knowledge keepers long before Western universities. We have always been astronomers and storytellers, teachers and healers, botanists and hydrologists, doulas and caretakers, peacekeepers and mediators, athletes and religious leaders. We were all of these things long before settlers. But who are we now? If we go to the next slide, you'll see that part of understanding who Indigenous people are from the Fernandeño Tataviam band of Mission Indians is understanding who we were is still who we are. Settler colonization has simply changed that. We are a village-based people, which means we're not a race-based people. To be in our tribe, you must descend from a specific set of villages. There are some circled in red. on this screen. And it's important to understand that lineal descendancy is different from race. Race is very much rooted in white supremacy, and the concept of how much blood are you or blood quantum is also a tool that was invented by the United States as part of their nationalist policies. It is not an Indigenous practice, and it is not an Indigenous practice of my tribe. Instead, being part of a village system means that we honor complex kinship practices, from intermarriages and to understanding that every single citizen in my tribe descends from certain villages. On top of that, we have all these different cultural groups. So being part of a tribe means that we might tell you we're Native American, and that's simplifying it for you to understand a message. But if you get to know us, we might tell you who we really are based on our cultural affiliation. And that might be even different than the name of our tribe. For example, Fernandeño is the Spanish name that was placed upon us when we were recruited and enslaved through the mission system, San Fernando Mission. Tataviam is one of our tribal names, and Band of Mission Indians just shows affiliation to San Fernando Mission. But as you can see on this screen, in the title of our name, you don't see all of our villages. If you asked me who I am, I would tell you I'm a descendant of the villages of Xiuhtganga, Chaguanga, Tochananga, and Tapu. And that would open the door to an entirely different conversation about culture. So that's just a little bit about how we talk about who we are that centers ourselves as Indigenous peoples before we move forward with the rest of the agenda. Jose?
Thank you, Pamela, for that. And I think this is a part of what we're trying to do here. And you mentioned it, Pamela, as far as disrupting these narratives of what land acknowledgements are, or these colonial views around blood quantum and citizenship and racialized categories. And so that's one of the key things for today. And to do that, we need to really understand settler colonialism, which we'll focus on here. I'll send it back over to Pamela just in a second. But we also want to do this in a global context. We recognize that Indigenous people are not just here in North America, but obviously globally. And Indigenous struggles here are part of Indigenous struggles in the Amazon or in anywhere else in the earth. And so that's another important part. Throughout this presentation, we'll also spend time with you all in breakout discussions, thinking through some of the material and the ideas that you've been either taught or the way that you're challenging settler colonialism. We have a couple of different activities, and we have a Jamboard activity. So we have a lot that'll be hopefully be very experiential. And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. So with that, let me turn it back over to Pamela to talk about what is settler colonialism and getting some definitions around that.
While I entered this talk as centering Indigenous peoples, it is important to understand the impact of settler colonization. For these lands, settler colonization is different than colonization itself. Or colonialism has an end, which means a group comes from another nation, they come to an Indigenous people's lands, they take those materials, minerals, resources that they want. They don't really want the land, just the resources, and they leave. But settler colonization is something different. It's a specific form of colonial process, which really entails settlers seeking to form a new territory through conquest of that territory's Indigenous peoples. And as a result, settlers live on stolen land and seek to make it their home by implementing new structures and institutions, laws, and understandings. So settler colonization is both a historical position, but also very much a present day practice. Settler colonization itself destroys to replace. Settlers invade a place, restructure, and it's not a one-time event. So when we teach about history and we talk about the gold rush and the California Indian genocide, that is only part of settler colonization. But settler colonization lasts indefinitely until the last settler evacuates Indigenous lands. Go to the next slide. But what's the whole point of settler colonization? The goal of it is to get to land. So it's about access to territory. If you look at this graphic, you can see the settler colonizer on one end, the land on the other, and what's in between, native bodies. And we say bodies because settler colonization does not treat Indigenous people as a peoples. Because in order for settler colonization to be effective, there has to be this removal of humanity from natives so that conquering is justifiable. You say things with mutant messages such as they're savages, they're inhumane, they have no laws, they have no knowledges. And in this way, bodies are seen as valuable, but not the person. And so then bodies even become part of the property that's part of the landscape to the settler. And it's important to note here that the idea of forced settler colonization is that occupancy is not identity. There's no inherent connection to land, which is very much a different worldview for many Indigenous peoples. Next slide. And what we see with so much settler colonization and with Indigenous peoples is they try to devise methods in which to rid the land of native bodies. And what that ends up playing out to be is genocide. So while genocide clears the path for settler colonizers, it rids their problematic and inconvenience of having Native Americans. And that's how the foundation of colonialism may be placed. So the very hard boundaries of what constitutes a member of this settler colonizing nation and the economic system that will then be created. So structural genocide that took place in North America, even here in California, is not unique. It's not this phenomenal event. It's meant to be long-standing and oppressive as part of settler colonial structure. And so the settler colonizers really tried to assist the government in ridding itself of this Indian problem. Here in California, if we're taking a place-based approach, we understand that the California Indian genocide happened through appropriations from the state of California as well as Congress. So what this meant is that in the very first session of state legislature, they passed this concept to also enslave Native Americans, which is unique because California came in as a so-called free state, which what leads to the Civil War later. But Native Americans were still wanted as bodies for working the land. And so this law was passed that allowed for Native American children to be taken in as possession and later extending to other Native Americans. And as you can imagine, the law was widely abused and ultimately led to the enslavements of tens of thousands of Native Americans who, by the way, had already been decimated in their population as a result of so many different factors. It is said that 10% of Native Americans survived the gold rush era, which means I am a descendant of the 10% of survivors. It is an astronomical number when you think about 90% of a population dying. And you couple that with genocide, with enslavement, with massive land theft and land dispossessions, you can understand how things became very unstable for Native Americans, specifically for those from California Indian tribal nations. And despite all of that, we'll talk about Indigenous futurism and what that means for our tribal communities. Next slide. Ultimately, what is unique about settler colonization? It's that it covers its own tracks. By the end of its trajectory, it claims that it never was settler colonization, and it isn't. But it reproduces itself and extinguishes itself when it's needed. It's hidden so that settlers become part of the land. Americans are from America, and settlers live on stolen lands. But what does that mean for you as future teachers, social workers, advocates? You are the ones who can accurately teach about settler colonization. You can incorporate social work practices that uplift best outcomes for tribal communities. There's so many different possibilities of how to honor Indigenous peoples and Indigenous knowledges.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Pamela. And this is why we spent some time breathing and stretching, because when you say, 10% of people survive, that is, like you said, that's astronomical. It is devastating to learn. And even as somebody who teaches this, and also my family is Native, we're enrolled members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz, which is located in Oregon. And, to learn about some of my family's stories, and to know that this was engineered very systematically, very intentionally to eliminate you. And so, the fact that we're even having this presentation today, the fact that you're, countering these narratives and telling this story and pushing back on all of this is really a sign of strength and resilience and resistance that it needs to be acknowledged. And so I'm just taking a breath, because that's very intense to think about those numbers. Along those lines, we want to show and bring and introduce sort of as a teaching device, but also as a way to make a global connection. This is a poem from two Indigenous women. One is from Greenland, and another one is from Marshall Islands. And it's called Rise from One Island to Another. And they will address, environmental injustice, climate change, but very, very much so with the analysis from a settler colonial lens. And this gives us an idea of how to see how the lens of settler colonialism impacting Indigenous people right now in present day. And so with that, let me turn it over to them as sort of invited guests to share their perspective here on this. It's about a 7-minute video. There are captions. So I'd encourage you, as you're watching, just to take a breath and really try to listen into what they are saying. Sorry, really quick. Can everybody, can you hear that?
Yes.
Okay. And
yes.
The captions are up too, so hopefully this works here. All right.
Sister of ice and snow, I'm coming to you from the land of my ancestors, from atolls, sunken volcanoes, undersea descent of sleeping giants.
Sister of ocean and sand, I welcome you to the land of my ancestors, to the land where they sacrificed their lives to make mine possible, to the land of survivors.
I'm coming to you from the land my ancestors chose. Ailangkainan, Marshall Islands, a country more sea than land.
I welcome you to Gardahlitnunat, Greenland, the biggest island on earth.
With me I bring these shells that I picked from the shores of Bikini Atoll and Brunette Dome.
In my hand I hold these rocks, picked from the shores of Nuuk, the foundation of the land I call my home.
With these shells I bring with me a story of long ago. Two sisters frozen in time on the island of Buyay. One magically turned to stone, the other who chose that life to be rooted by her sister's side. To this day, the two sisters can be seen by the edge of the reef, a lesson in permanence.
With these rocks I bring a story told countless times, a story about Sesuma Amna, mother of the sea, who lives in a cave at the bottom of the ocean. This is a story about the guardian of the sea. She sees the greed in our hearts, the disrespect in our eyes. Every whale, every stream, every iceberg are her children. When we disrespect them, she gives us what we deserve, a lesson in respect. Do we deserve the melting ice, the hungry polar bears coming to our islands, or the colossal icebergs hitting these waters with rage? From one island to another,
I ask for solutions. From one island to another,
I ask for your problems.
let me show you the tide, coming for us faster than we'd like to admit. Let me show you airports underwater, bulldozed reefs, blasted sands, and plans to build new atolls, forcing land from an ancient rising sea, forcing us to imagine turning ourselves to stone.
Can you see a glacier's grown the weight of the world's heat? I wait for you, here on the land of my ancestors, heart heavy with a continuous thirst for solutions. As I watch this land change while the world remains silent.
Sister of ice and snow, I come to you now, in grief.
Mourning landscapes that are always forced to change. First, through wars inflicted on us.
Then through nuclear waste dumped in our waters.
On our ice.
And now,
this. Sister of ocean and sand, I offer you these rocks, the foundation of my home. May the same unshakable foundation connect us, make us stronger than these colonizing monsters that still to this day devour our lives. The very same beasts that now decide who should live,
who should die. Sister of ice and snow, I offer you these shells and the story of the two sisters as testament, as declaration that despite what we are told, we will not leave. We will choose stone. We will choose to be rooted to this reef forever. From these islands,
we ask for solutions.
From these islands,
we ask, we demand that the world see beyond
ACs, SUVs, their pre-packaged convenience, their oil-slick dreams.
Beyond the belief that tomorrow will never happen, that this is merely an inconvenient truth.
Let me bring my home to yours.
Let's watch as Miami, New York, Shanghai, Amsterdam, London, Rio de Janeiro, and Osaka try to breathe underwater. You think you have decades before your home fall beneath tides?
We have years, we have months before you sacrifice us again, before you watch from your TV screens and computer screens to see if we will still be breathing while you do nothing.
My sister, I offer you these rocks as a reminder that our lives matter more than their power. That life in all form demands the same respect we all give to money.
That these issues will affect each and every one of us. None of us is immune.
And that each and every one of us has to decide if we will rise.
Right. I think really powerful. I forgot to mention their names. So the poets there are Kathy, and I'm not sure if I'm saying their name correctly, so I apologize, but Kathy Gentile Kitchener from the Marshall Islands, and Aka Nividiana from Greenland. Incredible poem, I think, to really illustrate this point of the connection to land, the importance of treating the land with respect and a relationship with land, and the urgency in their voice and the urgency in their stories about what is currently going on and how they are impacted. This statement about, I want to bring my home to yours and let's see you try to breathe underwater. It's very powerful, I think, when we're talking about settler colonialism and the dispossession and erasure of indigenous people who are often erased from these conversations around global climate change, even though they are facing the brunt of, and oftentimes are the lead activists in trying to stop all of these kind of changes, recognizing the violence of settler colonialism. And so with that, very powerful video. We wanted to spend some time now going to a breakout session and having you all discuss a little bit about not only what you just saw there, but really starting to think about what were some of the things that you learned as Indigenous people. And Kaylee, I know you're going to put the questions and also the link to the Jamboard into the chat so everyone can see it. But here's our questions. We'll send you to breakout sessions. In the breakout sessions, try to answer these questions, but also use the Jamboard link and go to the Jamboard and please add your thoughts and reflections and insights onto the Jamboard directly. You'll notice at the top of the Jamboard, there's 4 different pages that you can go to. So if one gets filled up, you can go to another one and start adding your comments there as well. Hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory. So the questions that we want to pose: what did you learn about Indigenous people in high school versus college? And then, are you told stories in your family about Indigenous people or ancestors? And if so, are they true? And what purpose do they serve? So those are the questions. Let me stop sharing it for a second. Okay, and Kaylee, do you have the breakout sessions all set up?
I do.
Okay, awesome. And I think we'll probably stay in the breakouts for about 7 to 8 minutes. So this just be a brief conversation, but enjoy the conversation, and please feel free to populate. I mean, we really ask you populate a lot on the Jamboard. Following that, we'll come back and we'll have a brief conversation reflecting on the Jamboard, but also some of the things that came up for you in this conversation. So everyone enjoy, and let's go ahead and open up the breakouts, Kaylee. Literally dealing with right now to have another discussion. But at this point, we want to turn it over. And by the way, I saw everyone posting the comments in the Jamboard. Continue to keep adding those throughout this conversation. That is excellent. And I also saw somebody referencing Oregon Trail, which we could open up a whole other conversation that we won't do right now. But I'm going to go back and share my PowerPoint. Pamela, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I really like that last comment about the young ones who are taking on this narrative in their own space and their own time. And that's really that important piece about Indigenous futurism, which allows Indigenous peoples to think about what their future looks like. And a lot of that is based on resilience and resistance from our point of views. Noting earlier when I talked that we are not our trauma, we are not defined by that pain and violence. Instead, we are that resilience, that empowerment, those strengths and those creativities. And we saw that in that Global Connections video. They were using art to have this powerful message and show the connectivity between Indigenous peoples, even if our Indigenous worldviews are not the same. And so while we talk about we need to decolonize systems, we also need to think about what are Indigenous interventions and what are Indigenous systems. For so long, systems in the United States for Native Americans were not built by Native Americans. Were not built from the foundation of Indigenous knowledges. They were just piecemealed together for what was acceptable in US structures. And so part of what Indigenous knowledges means is thinking through, well, how do we get to that next step, and what is that next step? So I did put on here a link that if you wanted to follow my tribe on Instagram, a part of Indigenous knowledges is connecting for us to the sacred, connecting to the arts, connecting to our youth. And so there is a short reel on Instagram that will show, you'll hear one of our songs, and it talks about what our programs are on our terms from our perspective. So you want to play that video? Really short Instagram reel. It doesn't do justice to how much time it takes to program for community efforts, but it really shows that there are a lot of Indigenous communities who are creating their own spaces, their own songs, their own culture on their terms for their community. And that's a part of Indigenous futures, whether it's using current tech, but that's how we get to a future that's on Indigenous terms.
Yeah, and so, you know, thank you. What was it me to go over, Pamela? I just got, thank you. So like with that comment and seeing that really powerful video, and again, just to keep in mind that a lot of what you saw there were, you know, traditions, songs, ceremonies that were outlawed at some point, that if you did them, that you could be killed, you could be incarcerated. The fact that they're even doing these and passing this along, using this current technology is, again, another sign of survivance, another sign of strength and resistance and resilience. And so we want to start thinking about orienting ourselves towards connection and action. So just two questions to sort of frame this next part of the conversation. So not that you have to answer these in your group, but just to think about, do you or people you organize with have relationships with Indigenous communities or organizers? And are you connecting your work with their work? And I think Kaylee is going to put these questions in the chat for people to continue thinking through. So this will frame the rest of our conversation here. Oops.
So land acknowledgements themselves require some deep thinking for them not to be performative. And now that we have some perspective around this work, let's do some individual temperature checks. So you can think of this as a simple, straightforward self-assessment tool that affords you an opportunity to gain some internal perspective and know where you can potentially pivot. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you go to the top of your screen and use the annotate tool, so at the very top, there's a bar, it should say view options. You click down to where it says annotate. You get these different features that you can use, and there's one that says stamp. If you touch on stamp, you'll see different images such as a check mark, a heart, a star. So you pick one, and I want you to stamp where you believe you would fall in this temperature check. So I'm going to read the temperature checks. Number one, I have not identified or built relationships with local Indigenous communities. I am interested in building relationships with local Indigenous communities, but I'm unsure of where to begin. I understand my own indigeneity story and have educated myself on local Indigenous issues, history, and cultures. I demonstrate my commitment to acknowledging Indigenous peoples and lands by educating myself and engaging with Indigenous communities and organizations where I live. So if you just take that stamp and start stamping away where you believe you are, what's interesting about doing this in a community setting is that you can take a moment to look at your own stamp and then reflect on where others' stamps are. And in this way, you can start thinking about, where are other people in relation to where am I? And that might be people who you want to talk to and talk about, how do we get to next steps? What are you doing? What could I be doing? And it provides just a really simple insight into the people around you in similar stages of work. Did everyone get a chance to put their stamp on the board? It's so beautiful. I am going to take a screenshot of it and drop it into our PowerPoint. Jose?
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This is really, really powerful to see. I think it's just a great activity too, to get, like you said, a collective visual of what's currently being done and what people would like to do. Going back to what Mercedes was saying before about people may feel kind of uncertain or unsure about, like, can I say this? What do I know? And kind of feeling embarrassed. But, you know, doing it in this way promotes us or pushes us towards taking action, and to really see that people are interested in learning more. And that's a great place to start, I think, for within all of this. So I think if I go to the next slide, it's going to erase all this, right? So you got your screenshot? Okay. Okay, here we go. Oh, do I need to erase it? Okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to shift to our next breakout session. And this time we'll have a little bit more time to start thinking about, what we've been discussing here, that temperature check activity, But we have some other prompts as well. And I know Kaylee will put these prompts along with the Jamboard link. This is a second Jamboard, so now we're going to a different one. And the questions are, what are Indigenous people and communities calling for? What are their visions or demands? What would achieving those visions mean for the place that you call home right now? And how can you work towards supporting those visions or demands? And here you might pull on ideas from the Rise poem that we just saw. You might pull on ideas that Pamela just mentioned throughout this presentation here today, or maybe what you're doing within local communities, or even broader movements just in general. So with that, we are going to go back to our breakout sessions. Kaylee, are the breakout sessions still set up and ready to go?
They're good to go.
We're talking about today is how do we disrupt settler colonization, and what does that look like? So I'd say one is developing a land acknowledgement, but then moving beyond that, but understanding what are land acknowledgements, what that can potentially look like. This is one that Cal State University Northridge, the Office of the President, developed with the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. It's really long, but I'm going to read it and then break it down and explain why. CSUN recognizes and acknowledges the Sesfatham, the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory of Sesavunga that is now occupied by our institution, and it honors their elders past and present and the Sesfatham descendants who are citizens of the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that the Sesfatham are still here, and we are committed to uplifting their stories, culture, and community. So what does this all mean? If you remember, way back an hour ago, I showed a map of the villages throughout these lands. And why that's significant is because our tribe is a village-based people with families descending from multiple villages. So our internal practice is that we have to not just acknowledge the tribe's homelands, but the specific coalitions of families from villages. So it's our cultural protocol to recognize a specific village on a map, those specific families who are of that village, and that goes into a land acknowledgement. That's how we internally show respect to the many different families enrolled in our tribe. It's not just a blanket, Fernandeño Tataviam tribe. It's culturally, we have to pay respect to the villages and those village lineages. So that's really what this land acknowledgement is about. But then in thinking about what are next steps, okay, we have a land acknowledgement. How do we move past that? So in this particular instance, it's really easy to think about Cal State Northridge. How can this institution, or even individuals, build equitable relationships with Indigenous peoples whose lands you occupy? So this can be two different perspectives, your institution or you as your own person. Jose, did you want to go to breakouts or do this in large group?
I think we'll do this in large group, just given the amount of time we have left. But I think, yeah, large group. I'll put the question in the chat too.
So when we've done this question in person before the pandemic, students had a lot of ideas, especially undergraduate students, because they could see all the different ways in which there could be change on campus. Does anyone have ideas of what something that could be done on campus that could build equitable relationships with the local tribe? Paula, you see your hand up?
I think when I think of Indigenous ways of being, I think of storytelling, and I think of maybe a partnership with the cinema television department, and maybe there's a way to do some sort of media or maybe social media videos or something. So that I think is a good way to start.
Great, thank you so much. I see you're building upon that Instagram reel and technology and what's already there at CSUN. I also see some comments in the chat about scholarships, Does anyone else have any other ideas they want to share? I see land back, agreed. And another comment, we could make the local tribe more visible. There are visual markers for trees and even bees, but not the people whose lands we occupy. Great, thank you so much. So talking about what are visual cues, how do we uplift a landscape with, instead of being devoid of Indigenous peoples, making sure that we give enough honor to Indigenous peoples that we're talking about native plants and native animals. Okay, Jose.
Yeah, these are great ideas, and thank you all for putting those in there. I also put a link to the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians website, which, you know, I didn't realize you even had that. I think I learned about this late last year or early last year, and it's really clear as far as like things to consider when you're doing them. So going back to what Scott mentioned before about, you know, when you don't know where to start, you know, go to, you know, the social media or the websites. You all have like a really detailed plan, ideas to consider and think through. You have a lot of resources that were really, really helpful in doing this. So as we're kind of closing out, we have about 4 minutes left. We wanted to spend some time with a Q&A. And so maybe people have questions you'd like to ask Pamela at this point. Or even just offer thoughts and reflections about the overall presentation. But we wanted to open up to you all to get a sense of what was coming up for you. So let me open it up. Oh, sorry, Paul, I didn't see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm on my neighborhood council, and I'm the chair of the Arts, Parks, and Beautification Committee. And this has come up a lot in our meetings about land acknowledgement. And the issue that I'm finding is that I want us to go beyond a land acknowledgement and to have more participation. So I guess, would it be okay for me to reach out to you and talk to you about that? Like how our neighborhood council can partner and we can go beyond a land acknowledgement?
That would be great.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we have a question here from Erica. What is the attack on critical race theory having in classrooms and amplifying Indigenous history? Is it being attacked? Is being attacked yet? So Erica, just to clarify, you're asking, I'm not 100% clear. So are you saying that because is critical race theory being attacked in classrooms? And is it also having an effect on Indigenous histories?
Correct. I mean, we know that it is being, there is an attack on it.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard anything having to do with the attack being specifically with Indigenous communities. And I mean, obviously, we spoke about, yeah, the colonial structures and things like that. And so, that's problematic. What is like?
Yeah, it's a good question. What are some of your thoughts, Pamela?
So I don't know how much impact that's going to have in California. California has its own set of laws and policies that have recently been passed by legislatures. So there's ethnic studies work that's already happening. there's a lot of different frameworks that can be used to get around different pieces, even if it's federal legislation. So I wouldn't be worried too much about, well, as an Indigenous person who lives under federal colonization and wakes up in occupation every day, I'm not too worried about new laws and policies because there's nothing worse than that's already been passed. It's finding ways to still be resilient and uplift the need. If we say, yes, we need to make sure that things like CRIT are available so that we can tell Indigenous stories, then that's something that we're just going to wake up tomorrow and do. You don't ask for permission to be sovereign. You are sovereign.
Mm. I think that's a good quote, right? Yeah, I know that's a good right there. We should end right there. Like that. Don't forget that quote. That was it. You don't have to ask permission to be sovereign. You are sovereign. Thank you for saying that, Pamela. I want to honor your time. I know it's 7:30, and that brings us to a close here. But again, always an honor to present with you. So appreciative of all the knowledge and the insight and that you always share with us, and always pushing us to thinking about that futurity, thinking about action, and not just getting stuck in these single stories. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who was here. Everyone at ESEPP for, helping us develop this space and this opportunity. And to everybody here who registered and attended, we really appreciate that. And I don't know if there's, Pamela, if there's anything you want to leave us with or any beyond that or anything.
No, I'm just grateful for all of you being here. And we did collect a lot of information. So living information built on community we'll put those notes somewhere. We don't know where.
Yeah. All right. And and then please leave us some feedback. I think Kaylee just put a link in there. And Dr. Jan just mentioned that we'll be taking a break. And so ESEPP folks and mentees, mentors will come back at around 7:40. To continue our part. But once again, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Pamela, for everything you shared with us tonight. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.